Staff Sergeant Jake Monroe sat alone at a corner table in the mess hall of the U.S. Horizon. His tray of food remained mostly untouched as he watched the alien delegation with careful eyes. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Concordat made first contact with Earth, and Jake still couldn't get used to seeing these creatures walking around like they owned the place. The Vrekians were the worst. Tall, insect-like beings with 4 arms and mandibles that clicked when they spoke. Commander Jupiter, their military leader, stood across the room talking with 2 human diplomats. Even from this distance, Jake could see the slight tilt of the alien's head. A gesture he had learned meant disrespect. "Mind if I join you?" Captain Lisa Winters placed her tray on the table without waiting for an answer. "Be my guest, Mom," Jake said, straightening his posture. Lisa glanced at his untouched food. "You need to eat, Monroe. That's an order." Jake stabbed at what the cooks had called meatloaf. "Yes, Mom. I know that look. What's bothering you?" Jake's eyes drifted back to the alien delegation. "Just wondering why they picked me for this job. I'm a grunt, not a diplomat." "You're not just a grunt. You've got 3 tours in the Middle East and more medals than anyone else in your unit. The brass wanted our best on this mission." Lisa lowered her voice. "They also wanted someone real. These aliens can smell fake from a mile away." Across the room, Commander Jeter's translator device let out a mechanical laugh. The sound made Jake's skin crawl. "They don't respect us," Jake said quietly. "They don't understand us," Lisa corrected. "Big difference." The mess hall doors slid open as more aliens entered. The Ilari moved like flowing water, their blue skin almost transparent under the lights. Behind them came the Mentorans, gray-skinned with oversized heads that housed their advanced brains. 7 species made up the Concordat, and representatives from each had come to evaluate Earth for potential membership. Commander Jeter spotted Jake and Lisa. The aliens' compound eyes shimmered as it approached their table. "Captain Winters, Staff Sergeant Monroe," Jeter said through the translator device pinned to its chest. "I hope the food meets your requirements." "It's fine, thank you," Lisa replied with a practiced smile. Jeter's mandibles clicked. "I was just reviewing your species' military history. So many conflicts. So much wasted potential." Jake felt his jaw tighten but remained silent. They had been briefed repeatedly about maintaining diplomatic relations. "We find it fascinating that a species would spend so much time fighting itself," Jeter continued. "The Vrekian people unified 10,000 years ago. We directed our energy outward, to the stars. Every species follows its own path," Lisa said diplomatically. Jeter's upper arms made a dismissive gesture. "Indeed, some paths are simply more efficient than others." The alien's translator couldn't quite capture the condescension in its voice, but Jake heard it clearly. "If you'll excuse me," Jake said, standing up. "I have duties to attend to." "Of course," Jeter said. "I look forward to our cultural exchange tomorrow. I understand we will be reviewing more of your war history." Lisa shot Jake a warning glance. He nodded slightly to show he understood. "Stay calm. Follow protocol." "Until tomorrow," Jake said, carrying his tray to the disposal unit. As he walked out of the mess hall, he could feel the aliens watching him. 6 months of these interactions had worn his patience thin. They saw humans as primitive, violent savages who had somehow stumbled into space technology. Back in his quarters, Jake looked at the photo on his desk, his old unit standing in front of a school they had built in a small village outside Baghdad. The local kids were in the picture too, smiling despite everything they had been through. "They don't get it," Jake said to the empty room. "And I don't know if they ever will." Outside his window, Earth shone blue and green against the blackness of space. For all its flaws and bloody history, it was home. And Jake would endure any number of condescending aliens to protect it. The next day, Jake stood at the back of the conference room as the cultural exchange began. The walls displayed images of Earth's military history, starting with ancient battles fought with spears and swords. Ambassador Daniel Harris guided the alien delegation through the presentation with practiced ease. As you can see, warfare has been part of human development since our earliest civilizations, Harris explained. Commander Jeter clicked his mandibles together, a sound Jake had come to recognize as amusement. The Vrekian leaned toward another of his kind and spoke in their native language. The translator devices were turned off, but Jake didn't need to understand the words to know they were mocking. The presentation moved through the centuries. Roman legions, medieval knights, colonial armies with muskets and cannons. With each new era, the aliens exchanged glances and subtle gestures. The 20th century saw the most destructive conflicts in our history, Harris continued as images of World War I filled the screens. Trenches full of muddy soldiers, gas masks, artillery fire. "You poisoned your own atmosphere," asked one of the Ilari, their blue skin rippling with shock. "Chemical warfare was one of mankind's darker inventions," Harris admitted. The screens changed to show World War I. Tanks rolled across Europe. Planes dropped bombs on cities. Navy ships exchanged fire in the vast Pacific. Your entire planet was engaged in this conflict. Professor Vex, the mentor and scientist, tilted his oversized head. "Most nations were involved, yes," Harris said. Commander Jeter stepped forward. "And what resources did your species gain from this planetary war?" Harris hesitated. It wasn't about resources in the traditional sense. Then what purpose did it serve? Jeter pressed. Jake felt his fists clench at his sides. The aliens wouldn't understand. They couldn't. The presentation continued to more recent conflicts: Vietnam, the Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq. Jake tensed when images from Fallujah appeared on screen. He had been there, had lost friends there. "Fascinating," Commander Jeter said, but his tone made it clear he meant the opposite. "Your species continued these localized conflicts even after you understood their cost." Jake bit his tongue. Captain Winters, standing nearby, gave him a warning look. When the presentation ended, the aliens broke into small groups, talking among themselves. Jake overheard snippets of conversation through their translators. Primitive behavior. No wonder they advanced so slowly. How did they not destroy themselves? Commander Jeter approached Jake directly. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, I understand you participated in several of these. What do you call them? Wars on terror?" "I served 3 tours in the Middle East," Jake said stiffly. "And what did your species gain from this expenditure of resources and life?" Jake met the alien's compound eyes. "That's a complicated question." "Is it?" "From our perspective, it seems quite simple. Your kind fights over invisible lines on maps and differences in belief systems. The Concordat outgrew such behavior millennia ago." Captain Winters appeared at Jake's side. "Commander Jeter, perhaps you'd like to see our next exhibit. We've prepared a demonstration of modern peacekeeping operations." Jeter waved 2 of his 4 arms dismissively. "More military displays. I had hoped to see evidence of your species' capacity for unity, not further examples of division." That evening, a reception was held in the ship's main hall. Human diplomats mingled with alien representatives, trying their best to forge connections. Jake stood by the wall, nursing a glass of water, watching the proceedings with wary eyes. Commander Jeter approached again, this time with several other aliens in tow. "Staff Sergeant, we were just discussing human combat tactics. So inefficient compared to Vrekian methods." "Is that so?" Jake kept his tone neutral. "Indeed. Tell me, how does it feel to belong to a species that wastes its potential on pointless conflict?" Jake felt something snap inside him. 6 months of holding his tongue, of hearing these aliens judge humanity without understanding the first thing about it. "With all due respect, Commander," he said carefully, "until you've walked in our boots, you might want to reserve judgment." The room seemed to go quiet. Captain Winters moved toward them, concern on her face. "An interesting sentiment," Jeter said. "Perhaps someday you'll educate us on what we're missing." Little did the alien know, That day would come sooner than expected. 2 weeks passed aboard the U.S. Horizon. The evaluation mission continued with daily meetings, presentations, and cultural exchanges. Jake did his best to avoid Commander Jeter, but on a ship this size, that proved nearly impossible. On the 15th day, the alien delegation requested a tour of the ship's military museum. Captain Winters assigned Jake as one of the guides, despite his obvious reluctance. "Keep it together, Monroe," she told him before they entered. "Just a few more weeks, and they'll be gone." The museum wasn't large, but it contained artifacts and displays from Earth's major conflicts. Glass cases held weapons, uniforms, and personal items donated by veterans. Video screens showed historical footage on loops. One wall displayed medals and decorations, while another listed the names of fallen soldiers from recent wars. As they walked through the exhibits, Jake noticed the aliens' reactions. The Illyri seemed genuinely sad, their blue skin darkening around their eyes. The Mentorans studied everything with scientific curiosity. But the Vrikians, led by Commander Jeter, maintained their air of superiority. "These projectile weapons are so crude," Jeter commented, looking at a display of rifles from different eras. "The Vrikian military moved beyond physical ammunition 5,000 years ago." Jake said nothing. He led the group to the next display, which showed medical equipment used in field hospitals. "Your battlefield medicine is surprisingly advanced," said one of the Mentorans, "though clearly necessary given your inefficient combat methods." Jake's jaw tightened, but he continued the tour. They stopped before a wall that listed names of soldiers who had died in the Middle East conflicts. Jake knew many of those names personally, friends who hadn't come home. "Why do you memorialize the dead this way?" asked Commander Jeter. "In Vrikian culture, those who fail in battle are not remembered." "They didn't fail," Jake said, his voice low. "They sacrificed." "A sacrifice implies gain," Jeter replied. "What did your species gain from these deaths?" Jake stared at the wall of names. He thought of Pete Sanchez, who had stepped on an IED while pushing a local child out of the way. Of Maria Collins, who had died holding pressure on a wounded civilian's artery until help arrived. "Freedom isn't free," Jake said, using an old phrase that suddenly felt very real. Jeter made that clicking sound again, the one that meant he found humans amusing. "Such primitive emotion. This is why your species remains divided. You attach feelings to warfare instead of treating it as the logical extension of resource acquisition that it is." Something inside Jake broke. All the comments, all the sidelong glances, all the mockery of human sacrifice. It was too much. "With all due respect, Commander," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you don't understand the first thing about human warfare." The room went silent. The other aliens turned to watch. Captain Winters stepped forward, ready to intervene. But Ambassador Harris placed a hand on her arm and subtly shook his head. Commander Jeter's compound eyes fixed on Jake. "Enlighten me then, human." Jake looked around at the aliens, at Captain Winters, at Ambassador Harris. He knew he was breaking protocol, but he couldn't stop now. "Not here," he said. "If you really want to understand, we need to talk properly." Ambassador Harris nodded. "We can use the conference room. I think this conversation is overdue." Captain Winters looked concerned but didn't object. She trusted Jake enough to let this play out. The group moved to a nearby conference room. The aliens took seats around the large table, with Commander Jeter at one end and Jake at the other. Captain Winters and Ambassador Harris remained standing, unsure where this was going. "You believe we fight because we're primitive," Jake began. "Because we never evolved past our tribal instincts. The evidence suggests this, yes," Jeter replied. Jake took a deep breath. He wasn't a diplomat or a historian. He was just a Marine who had seen both the worst and the best of humanity in the middle of war. But maybe that was exactly what these aliens needed to hear. "Then let me tell you about human warfare from someone who's actually experienced it," he said, "not from history books or strategic analyses, but from the ground." And with that, Jake Monroe began to explain what the aliens had been missing all along. Jake stood at the front of the conference room. The alien delegation watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Commander Jeter sat with his forearms crossed, mandibles clicking softly. "You think we don't know war is terrible," Jake began. "We know better than anyone. We've been fighting wars since we could pick up sticks and rocks." He tapped a control panel, and images appeared on the large screen behind him. Unlike the official presentation from before, these were personal photos. A younger Jake with his squad in the desert. Soldiers sharing meals with local children. Medics treating wounded civilians. You look at our history and see only the fighting. You miss what happens in between the bullets and bombs. Jake pulled up a new image, his unit helping to build a school in a small Iraqi village. "This is my squad. We fought in some of the worst battles in Iraq. Lost good people." His voice grew quieter. "But this is also us, 6 months later, building a school in a village that had been caught in the crossfire." Commander Jeter leaned forward slightly. "Repairing damage you caused?" "No," Jake replied. "Creating something new, something better." He switched to another image. American soldiers sharing medical supplies with former enemy combatants. "Humans don't fight because we're primitive. We fight because sometimes fighting is necessary to protect something greater. And in our darkest moments, we've discovered our greatest strength." Jake looked directly at Jeter. "You said your species unified 10,000 years ago. That's impressive. But you were born into unity. You never had to earn it." Ambassador Harris stepped forward. "If I may add some historical context." Jake nodded, and Harris continued. "After World War II, the most destructive conflict in our history, former enemies became our strongest allies. Japan and Germany, once our bitter foes, are now among our closest friends. The United Nations was formed. Human rights expanded. Medical advances made during wartime saved countless civilian lives afterward." One of the Illyri spoke up, their voice soft and melodic. "You're suggesting that conflict strengthened your ethical development." "I'm saying," Jake replied, "that knowing the cost of war makes humans value peace more deeply than species that never had to fight for it." He pulled up more images, the Berlin Wall falling, former soldiers from opposite sides embracing decades after war's end, peace treaties being signed. "Every time we step back from the brink, every time we choose cooperation over conflict, it's a conscious choice. We don't take peace for granted because we know exactly what we stand to lose." Captain Winters watched from the side, a hint of pride in her eyes. This wasn't the diplomatic approach they had planned. But Jake was reaching the aliens in a way their carefully crafted presentations hadn't. Commander Jeter remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Tell me about your personal experience, Staff Sergeant. Not history, but what you saw with your own eyes." Jake took a deep breath. This was difficult territory, memories he didn't often share. "My second tour, we were stationed near a small town that had been hit hard by fighting. The local school had been destroyed. The kids had nowhere to go, nothing to do except watch the world fall apart around them." He showed a picture of himself sitting with a group of children, teaching them to read. "We started spending our free time with them, teaching classes under a tent, playing soccer, normal things in an abnormal situation." Jake's voice grew stronger. "One day, a bomb went off in the market. My friend Pete ran toward the explosion, not away from it. He pulled 7 people to safety before a second blast hit. Pete didn't make it, but those 7 people did, including 2 children who now have futures because of him." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each alien. "That's what human warfare teaches us, that even in our worst moments, we can choose to be our best selves. Not because it's logical, but because it's right." The room was completely silent. Even Commander Jeter's mandibles had stopped clicking. "We don't glorify war," Jake said finally. "We remember it. We learn from it. And hopefully someday we'll move beyond it. but we'll carry its lessons with us to the stars. Jake paused to let his words sink in. The aliens exchanged glances, some confused, others thoughtful. He decided to continue with more personal stories. In my first tour, our unit was stationed near a village that had very little clean water. The local well had been damaged in a firefight before we arrived. Jake showed them a photo of soldiers and locals working together to dig a new well. We spent 3 weeks digging that well, not because we had to, but because it was the right thing to do. By the end, some of the same people who had initially seen us as enemies were sharing meals with us. Dr. Neelix, one of the Ilari representatives, raised a slender blue hand. But surely these are exceptions. Your history shows consistent patterns of cruelty during wartime. You're right, Jake admitted. War brings out the worst in us too. I'm not going to pretend humans are perfect. We've done terrible things to each other. But that's part of the lesson. Ambassador Harris stepped forward again. After each major conflict, humanity created new rules of war. We established protections for civilians, for prisoners, for the wounded. We learned from our mistakes and tried to do better. He pulled up historical images on the screen. The signing of the Geneva Conventions, the founding of the Red Cross, humanitarian missions to war zones. The Concordat species were born unified. Harris continued. Humans had to learn unity, step by difficult step. Commander Jeter finally spoke. These are impressive anecdotes, but they don't change the fact that your species continues to engage in armed conflict. Less than ever before in our history, Jake countered. And when we do fight, it's increasingly to protect others who can't protect themselves. He showed footage of peacekeeping missions, soldiers building refugee camps, distributing food, providing medical care. Most of what modern militaries do isn't fighting at all. It's helping after natural disasters, protecting aid workers, training local forces to defend themselves. Captain Winters joined the conversation. Commander Jeter, how does the Vrikian military spend most of its time during peace? The alien seemed taken aback by the question. Training, maintaining readiness, patrolling borders. Our forces do those things too, she said. But they also build bridges, literal and figurative ones. They dig wells, construct schools, provide medical care to isolated communities. Professor Vex, the mentor and scientist, had been unusually quiet. Now he spoke up, his oversized head tilting slightly. I've been analyzing human development patterns compared to Concordat species, he said. While technologically slower, human ethical systems evolved at rates 3 times faster than our averages. Your international cooperation frameworks are actually more sophisticated than predicted for your technological level. Because we had to work harder for them, Jake said simply. Peace means more when you know the cost of war. A young Vrikian officer who had been silent until now suddenly spoke. The human speaks truth. Without understanding darkness, how can we truly appreciate light? Our species has been unified so long we face no real challenges. Perhaps that's why we've stagnated culturally for centuries. Commander Jeter's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation or surprise. He hadn't expected one of his own to side with the humans. Consider this, Jake continued. Your species achieved unity through conquest, right? The strongest Vrikian faction dominated the others until there was one government. Jeter nodded reluctantly. Humans are trying a different path. Messy, slow, frustrating, but we're working toward unity through cooperation and mutual respect, not force. It's harder, but maybe in the end, it builds something stronger. The room fell silent again as the aliens considered his words. Even Commander Jeter seemed to be thinking deeply rather than preparing another dismissive comment. Dr. Neelix, the Ilari representative, broke the silence. I believe I begin to understand. Your conflicts, painful as they were, taught your species empathy on a scale we may not comprehend. Jake nodded. The soldier who has seen war firsthand is often the strongest voice for peace. We know what's at stake. Ambassador Harris smiled slightly. For the first time since the evaluation mission began, it felt like the aliens were truly seeing humanity, not just as a primitive warlike species, but as one with unique strengths born from its struggles. The real conversation was finally beginning. The meeting continued well into the ship's night cycle. What had started as Jake's impulsive response had turned into a deep discussion about the nature of conflict and peace. Even Commander Jeter was asking thoughtful questions now instead of making dismissive comments. "If I understand correctly," the Vrekian said, "you believe that facing adversity, including war, forced your species to develop stronger ethical frameworks." "Not just war," Ambassador Harris clarified. "All kinds of challenges. Natural disasters, disease, resource limitations. But yes, our conflicts taught us hard lessons we might not have learned otherwise." Professor Vex had been working on a data tablet during the conversation. Now he projected a series of charts onto the main screen. "I've been comparing development markers between Earth and Concordat worlds," he explained. "While humans lag in technological advancement by approximately 300 years, you've developed certain social systems at an accelerated rate." The charts showed comparative timelines of different species development. "Most notably," Vex continued, "human diplomatic structures, conflict resolution mechanisms, and cultural integration systems are extraordinarily sophisticated for your development stage." Jake looked at the charts, surprised. "You're saying we're good at solving problems?" "Exceptionally so," Vex replied. "Particularly problems involving diverse groups with competing interests." Captain Winters smiled slightly. "We've had plenty of practice." Commander Jeter studied the data with all four of his eyes. "This is unexpected. Our preliminary evaluations suggested humans would be too fractious and primitive for Concordat membership." "Maybe being fractious isn't always a bad thing," Jake suggested. "Different viewpoints create better solutions when they work together." Dr. Neelix, who had been quiet for some time, spoke up. "On my world, we have a saying: still water grows stagnant. Perhaps the Concordat has been too still for too long." The young Vrekian officer who had supported Jake earlier added, "The Vrekian military hasn't faced a real challenge in over 500 years. We train and patrol, but for what purpose? Our tactics and technologies have barely evolved in centuries." Commander Jeter's mandibles clicked in what Jake now recognized as a sign of deep thought rather than mockery. "When our ancestors unified our world," Jeter said slowly, "it was through conquest. The strongest dominated the rest. We have always seen this as the natural order." He gestured toward the images Jake had shown of former enemies working together. "This concept of reconciliation, of building something new together after conflict, it is alien to us." He paused. "Perhaps that is our limitation, not yours." Ambassador Harris seized the moment. "Commander, the Concordat evaluation was meant to determine if Earth has something to offer your alliance. I believe we've shown today that we do, not despite our history of conflict, but because of what we learned from it." The room fell silent as the aliens considered this. Jake watched their faces, seeing the subtle shifts in expression that indicated changing thoughts. Even with their alien features, he could recognize the universal look of minds being opened to new ideas. Professor Vex was the first to respond. "I must adjust my evaluation parameters. Human resilience and adaptability represent valuable traits our coalition currently lacks." Dr. Neelix nodded, her blue skin rippling with emotion. "The Ilari consensus will also be reconsidered. We had concerns about human aggression, but we failed to see the compassion that balances it." All eyes turned to Commander Jeter. As the military representative of the Concordat's most powerful species, his opinion carried significant weight. "I require time to process this information," he said finally. "But I will say this. In 10,000 years of unity, the Vrekian people have not faced true adversity. Perhaps that is why we have grown complacent." He stood, towering over the humans. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, you have given me much to consider. Your species has wisdom we did not expect." With that, The meeting adjourned. As the aliens filed out, Captain Winters approached Jake. "That was a risk, Monroe," she said quietly, "but a good one. You reached them in a way our official presentations couldn't." Jake watched Commander Jeter speaking intensely with the young Vrikian officer in the corridor outside. "I think they're still deciding what to make of us. Aren't we all?" Winters replied with a small smile. "Get some rest, Staff Sergeant. Something tells me the real work is just beginning." 3 days later, the entire crew of the U.S. Horizon gathered in the main hall. The Concordat delegation had finished their evaluation and was ready to announce their decision regarding Earth's application for membership. Jake stood at attention in his dress uniform, trying not to fidget. Captain Winters stood beside him, looking calm and professional, but Jake could see the tension in her eyes. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you changed minds. That counts for something." The 7 alien representatives entered the hall and took their places at the front. Commander Jeter stepped forward as the designated speaker. After careful evaluation and much discussion, he began, his translator conveying his words in a neutral tone. "The Galactic Concordat has reached a decision regarding Earth's application for membership." The room was completely silent. Jake held his breath. Earth will be granted probationary membership in the Concordat, with full status to be determined after a 5-year observation period. A murmur ran through the human crew. This was better than they had hoped for, given the aliens' initial disdain. Jeter continued, "Our official report notes that humans remain divided in ways we find concerning. However," he paused, his compound eyes scanning the room before settling on Jake, "your species' resilience, adaptability, and capacity for growth through adversity represents a valuable perspective our coalition currently lacks." Ambassador Harris stepped forward to accept the formal declaration, his face showing carefully controlled relief. "On behalf of Earth, we accept this decision and look forward to proving ourselves worthy of full membership," Harris said. As the formal ceremony concluded, the crew broke into small groups, talking excitedly. Jake stayed where he was, still processing what had happened. They had done it. Earth was in. Commander Jeter approached him, the young Vrikian officer from the meeting at his side. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," Jeter said, "your words made me uncomfortable." Jake tensed, unsure where this was going. But the alien continued, "I have come to understand that discomfort often leads to growth. My people have much to learn from yours." The younger Vrikian spoke up. "Commander Jeter has recommended a new exchange program between our military forces. We wish to understand your approach to peacekeeping and humanitarian operations." Jake was surprised. That's good to hear." "There is more," Jeter said. "The Concordat Military Council has requested that Earth provide a liaison officer to our Central Command, someone who can explain the human perspective on matters of security and conflict resolution." Captain Winters joined them, having overheard the conversation. "That's an unexpected honor, Commander. Do you have someone in mind?" All 4 of Jeter's eyes turned to Jake. "We do." Later that evening, Jake sat alone in his quarters, staring at the official transfer orders on his tablet. Captain Winters had delivered them personally, along with his promotion to gunnery sergeant. "First human military liaison to Concordat Central Command," she had said. Quite a step up from showing aliens around a museum. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Ambassador Harris. "Got a minute, Gunny?" he asked, using Jake's new rank. "Yes, sir," Jake said, standing. At ease, "I wanted to thank you personally." Harris sat in the room's only chair. The diplomatic team spent months preparing reports, presentations, cultural exchanges, all carefully designed to present humanity in the best possible light. He smiled wryly. "And then you accomplished more with one honest conversation than we did in 6 months of diplomacy." Jake shook his head. "I just spoke from experience, sir. Sometimes that's what's needed." Harris stood to leave. "Your transport to Concordat headquarters leaves tomorrow. You'll be the first human many of them have ever met." Any thoughts on how you'll approach it? Jake looked out his window at the stars, the same stars that would soon be his destination. I'll just tell them the truth, sir, about who we are, where we've been, and what we've learned along the way. Harris nodded. Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon we have. As the ambassador left, Jake turned back to the window. Humanity was taking its first real steps into a wider galaxy. There would be challenges ahead, misunderstandings to navigate, bridges to build. But if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was face adversity and grow stronger from it. The lessons of Earth's troubled past would light their way to a better future among the stars. And Jake Monroe, a Marine who had seen both the darkness and light of humanity's heart, would help show them the way.